broadcast is sponsored by the Committee to Save Jefferson County. I want to remind you that on tonight, we are opening up the phone lines. You can call us at 205-994-8949. Again, you're on B94.9. Knowledge is power. I'm Eva Melton, and I'm here with
Richard Rice. Welcome back to the show, everybody.
Yeah, Richard, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you. So tonight, we're talking about a very important topic. You've been seeing a lot of stuff in the media, and we have the people here to really give us what's really going on right now. And so we're talking about environmental racism and public corruption in Alabama. And, you know, environmental racism, we know what racism is, even if maybe perhaps we don't know the textbook definition. When we say racism, we know what that means, right, Richard?
We definitely do.
But when
we live with it.
Yeah, but when we talk about environmental racism, what does that mean?
Well, since you're going to put me on the spot like that, no, but seriously, it is exactly what it sounds like, right? And so it's really environmental injustice within like a racial context. And it particularly applies to marginalized communities, communities of color who may be disproportionately subjected to living in areas that have more pollutants or, you know, more toxins in that area. And on the flip side, it could also mean lack of access to things like fresh water, you know, or having parks and things like that of that nature. So it's pretty much what it sounds like.
Awesome. So tonight we have various guests. So tell us who we have and what we're going to be talking about.
Right. So as you mentioned earlier, we're going to be speaking about environmental racism and public corruption. You know, we're coming off the back end of this this trial in which the United States charged two local attorneys and an executive from Drummond Cole with basically corruption, bribery, conspiracy charges. And, you know, one of those attorneys and one of the executives from Drummond was actually found guilty. And it was all stemming from the 35th Avenue Superfund site in North Birmingham and whether or not that site would be expanded and added to a national priority list. These individuals were basically working to prevent that site from being expanded and to being added to that national priority list. And so today we have some people here with us from GASP, which is a nonprofit organization that's specifically set up to address some of the environmental justice issues that we've discussed here today. And we have Haley Colson-Lewis and Michael Hansen with us. So we'd like to welcome them to the show. And we also have some other guests, some community members. We have Mr. Powell here as well. Later in the show, we're going to be joined with a few people from Uniontown who are going to speak about some of the unique environmental justice issues that they're experiencing. So what I'd like to do is maybe Michael or Haley, if you all would like to just kind of introduce yourself and speak a little bit about GASP. Maybe Michael, you might want to do that.
All right. I'm Michael Hansen, the Executive Director of GASP. I've been with the organization for 5 years, a little over 5 years now. And we're an organization that was founded to address air pollution issues in Birmingham and throughout Alabama. But in particular, we've been working a lot in the northern Birmingham area to address the ongoing pollution there and the legacy pollution that's affected the health and well-being of those communities.
Awesome. And Haley?
I'm Haley. I'm the staff attorney for GASP. What Michael said on everything about GASP, and as the staff attorney, I did a lot of work on specific issues that Richard was talking about with listing the 35th Avenue site on the national priorities list, and then efforts to expand EPA's study area into Tarrant. So that's a little bit about me and what I do for GASP.
Excellent, excellent. So you guys don't have to be modest. You all have really, you know, been engaged with this effort for quite some time now, several years. You know, before it was really at the forefront of media attention on a local, regional, and a national level. And a lot of times this type of work kind of goes unnoticed. And so, you know, we're definitely grateful to have you all doing the work you're doing. Happy to have you on the show tonight. We want to give some context to talk about what is a Superfund site, what is a national priority list. You know, I want you all to talk about that. And then we want to talk a little bit about how public corruption has thwarted or frustrated, you know, diminished some of your work and some of the, you know, subjected the people in the communities to live in these toxic communities longer. I guess that's the main issue. But we also want to then talk about solutions. I know that there's been several solutions that have been proposed to the city of Birmingham, but obviously we don't want to just be relying on City Hall to lead us. There's some things that we can do as a community. I want to make sure we have time to discuss those things. But either Haley or Michael, if you could, first talk to us about specifically what is a Superfund site, what does that mean, and then talk about how to define the 35th Avenue Superfund site, and then tell us a little bit about the national priority list.
Okay, I'll take a stab at this, and Michael, if I get too wonky, please pull this away from me. So a Superfund site, so Superfund is a funding mechanism that EPA has, and it's just a way for if there's a piece of land that's very contaminated, they can be available for Superfund money. It's emergency cleanup money. And Superfund is a fund that's set out by Congress, and it's just kind of like a pool of money that can be used. The 35th Avenue site is just a geographical boundary established by the EPA. And that site includes the neighborhoods of North Birmingham, Collegeville, Fairmont, and Harriman Park. We'll collectively call them the Northern Birmingham communities. So when we reference those communities, those are the ones we're talking about. And EPA establishes a study area like that through various ways, but to get to Superfund, the EPA has to go through a three-step process. First, someone has to alert the EPA that there might be a problem and ask them to come in and do a preliminary assessment. From there, they just kind of study existing data on the area that they're looking at. If they see cause for concern to human health or the environment through that existing data, then they will do a site inspection. And in the site inspection, EPA actually goes in and starts taking samples themselves and analyzing them for certain things. If that's bad enough, they will recommend that a site be listed on the national priorities list. So that is what was happening in the Northern Birmingham communities at the 35th Avenue site. The national priorities list is kind of the last step, and it's called CERCLA is the law, and I do not remember what it stands for all the time. I think it's Compensation Environmental Recovery Liability Act. There's another C in there that I forgot. But
Right,
Yeah, we'll take it.
So, but I mean, the national priorities list, and like, what would have been the benefits? Speak about that specifically, the process. You know, in particular, the part of the process that seeks public input, specifically from elected officials in the local area and from residents. I think it's important for us to really highlight that, given what's taking place.
Right. So the national priorities list, a lot of times, anytime any federal agency does something, there's the ability of citizens to participate in a meaningful way. So the national priorities list had a public comment process, and it was 30 days, but they gave an extension for 60 days. And during that time, you as a concerned individual can comment, you as a group like GASP can comment, which we did, and Mr. Powell also commented along with many other residents of the community. And I'll kind of speak to what went awry there.
Mm-hmm.
So in the same way that people that are concerned and groups that are concerned can comment, industry that maybe does not want to have to help pay, because that's the other thing under NPL and under Superfund is that yes, there's this pot of money available, but also EPA will look to what they call the potentially responsible parties, which there were 5 of them, and it was KMAC, which is a scrapyard, ABC Coke, Walter Coke, those are both coking companies, US Pipe, and Alagasco. And so through that public comment process, industries will say, hey, we're not responsible. That's kind of the typical way things happen.
Right, deny.
Right. And the typical way it happens, because there are 3 sites proposed at the recovery trial that we learned about. One of the entities, Drummond Company, that was a potentially responsible party, they did their own community organizing, which again is fine. But they solicited their own comments and had some of their own community organizers, and they had a lot more influence than GASP did, I would say, and a lot of elected officials at the city, state, and even the national level came out against the listing. And
Right.
we hear from EPA that was a bit unprecedented, so the site still has not been added.
Right, and so Michael, if you could talk about like what was the potential exposure for liability in terms of if the Superfund site had been expanded, and talk about the benefits to being added to the national priorities list. And then I guess one other thing I would like you to mention is that the city of Birmingham didn't actually comment during this period officially. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, all right.
So Haley mentioned that we had asked for, and other parties asked for an extension on that comment period. The city did ask for a comment extension, but they never did submit comments on the national priorities list. So as far as the benefits, it would have unlocked additional funding to do more study and cleanup in the area, and which could have led to various types of revitalization or assistance to residents, and Mr. Powell will probably speak about that in a bit.
Right.
But then as far as liability, Drummond and the other potentially responsible parties could have been on the hook for millions of dollars in the costs they've spent. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's tens of millions of dollars, and over 50,000 tons of soil have been removed. So
Right.
you can imagine how expensive that would be for the companies.
Yeah, definitely. And so, as it stands right now, I mean, the 35th Avenue Superfund site it's still designated a Superfund site, and I guess there's still some cleanup going on. Is that right?
Yeah, they're in the final stages of the cleanup, so there's a few dozen homes that have left to the soil remediation to be done.
Right. And if you could speak a little bit about some of the toxins that have been found to be present in the area, just generally. We don't have to get into too many specifics, and some of the health risks. So people can really kind of get some of the context of how serious of an issue this is.
Sure. So what we're looking at is there are heavy metals in the soil, in particular lead and cadmium. There's also been benzene, which is a carcinogen, very harmful chemical. PAHs, polyaromatic hydrocarbons. What else? Naphthalene, all kinds of really toxic stuff that can cause cancer or lead to other really harmful effects.
Right. And I mean, some of these things have various effects on children. I've heard that they may cause ADHD. It can cause all types of respiratory issues as well. And we talk about since we titled this show Environmental Racism, talk about how these particular health concerns are extremely more prominent in one particular zip code as opposed to areas over the mountain and some of the surrounding areas that are maybe 20 miles or less away, but still don't see as high of an incidence of some of these health issues.
Yeah, so in addition to cancer-causing chemicals, these things are linked to, like you said, respiratory illnesses, heart disease. They can exacerbate diabetes and other lung conditions like COPD. They've been linked to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and all sorts of things that gets into your bloodstream and into your brain. So it's really bad stuff. And if you look at health data and you map it, you can actually see that there are higher incidents of premature death and disease in areas like Northern Birmingham, or in general in communities of color versus your wealthier white suburbs,
Right.
and that's true across the country.
Right. I mean, but even if you compare this North Birmingham area to other predominantly black areas in the city of Birmingham, you still find a higher incidence of those
Correct.
issues, right? Yeah. Great. And so yeah, I mean, I want us to dig a little bit deeper in that, but I really want us to be solution oriented. Let's take a few minutes here to talk a little bit about GASP. Where are you all right now? What are you working on? What are some of the things that the public can do to help?
Well, we learned a lot during the trial, a lot about how our work was undermined and what tactics the opposition used to do that. And so we're still sorting through all of the evidence that was presented in court and trying to figure out how can we better advocate for the communities in Northern Birmingham. And we really want to make sure that the pollution that's still going on is reduced, because that's something that the trial did not address. It addressed corruption, but did not address the pollution. And so we're looking at ways that we can affect that change. And we've been working on air pollution permits in that area for the last 5 years since the Walter Cook and ABC Cook permits went up for renewal. And so we've been fighting the health department and Drummond in court over their permit for ABC Cook for 4.5 years. Their permit will be up for renewal again next year, and we still haven't had a hearing on that. So we're still working on that, and we're also reviewing what can be done about the EPL and some of the other things that were thwarted by Drummond. Haley, did you have anything to add? Oh yeah, and we did file a Title VI complaint on behalf of some of our members, and that is through the Civil Rights Act. We allege that the health department discriminated against minority communities by allowing the air pollution to go on from Walter Coke and ABC Coke. So we're hoping to get a judgment in our favor from the EPA that will result in a better environmental justice program at the health department and some solutions there that can come from that. So we'll be negotiating that hopefully this year.
Wow, I want to go ahead and remind our listeners that the phone lines are open at 205-994-8949. And so I grew up in Hooper City, which is on the northern side of town, so I know exactly where these areas are. Originally was zoned to actually go to Hudson Middle School, but did not. But I saw a lot of the, I know we talked about how it impacts the health of children, babies, elders. I saw the video on your website where families were talking about basically the entire family having developed some form of cancer, right? But this air that's being breathed and still being breathed, still continuing. I know we have these things on the board, but on the slated to be done from a legal perspective, what can the community, what can we be doing?
So I think that's a wonderful question, and one thing that we really focus on as advocates is, some of this stuff gets really awful and really depressing, and you want to have meaningful action items for individuals to take. So to that end, we do have a program at GASP called Air Watch. If you see something, say something is kind of the idea. If you see a plume of smoke, if you smell something, you can call us. We'll help investigate. And part of investigating is citizen science, which is a popular term right now, but it means your average citizen can study a problem themselves, and there's technology to do so. So we have air monitors that people can rent, and we can help analyze the data and help figure out what the problem is.
And so we have regulatory agencies, and there's this. We kind of, as citizens, we pool our resources together. We pay taxes, right? And then there's these regulatory agencies that are supposed to do this very function that you mentioned. So why is it that we as a public still need to go out and rent an air monitor in order to do that? I don't know if that's something that's obvious to our listeners, but it's worth highlighting.
Right, so you're mentioning agencies which are tasked with holding accountable the industries and kind of balancing the public health with the industry's ability to operate. And so what we've noticed, not only through the trial, but also just through our advocacy work in general, is that these agencies could use a little help. And we act as a watchdog a lot of times, in the sense that we'll say, hey, this isn't right, like we think this is, these numbers aren't right, double check it. And it's helpful to have a constant check on the agencies, somebody watching, because your average citizen can't always be watching the agencies. That's why we work full time on this issue, because that's actually our job to watch them. And then, being in regular communication, saying, I know this is an issue, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, or yes, that's what I'm saying.
So this Air Watch, signing up as a citizen to assist, monitor something, how do we get to this? Is it on your website, or how does someone get to this information?
It's on our website. We have a phone number, we have a complaint form online, and then all of our social media mentions it as well, I believe.
Okay, awesome.
Right, and the video that you mentioned earlier, Eva, is Toxic City. You can pretty much just Google Toxic City Birmingham and it'll come up. It was quite the centerpiece of the trial in a lot of ways, not every day, but on some of the days it was. Apparently, which, that just speaks to the quality of the work that you all are doing at GASP. So definitely thankful for that. I think we have a caller on the line. Do we have time to get to the caller before the break? We do. Go. Okay. Hey, caller, thank you for calling in. Yes, you're on the air.
Hey, Richard.
Hey, Adam.
Hey, Adam, how's it going?
Are you there?
Yep,
We're here.
We're here. Go ahead.
Can you hear us? We hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We hear you, Adam.
Okay, here's my question. I was wondering if there was present president, his administration, the impact of his decisions about the EPA, how it's affecting your ability to do the work that you all are doing in the city?
Wow, that's a great question, Adam.
What
And
question was that, Richard?
so yeah, just to repeat the question, Adam Mixon just basically asked, what's the difference between operating under a Trump administration EPA as opposed to maybe, Obama administration EPA or former EPAs? And so I'll just let our guest, our expert, speak to that issue.
Okay, well, there's a few things about that I want to point out. One is, I think the most important one is that it keeps us looking in every direction all the time. We've got so much more work to do now because of the way that this administration is handling environmental issues in particular. So we're, like this past week, they announced a plan to roll back clean car standards. And so we've got to look at that too. And we've not really been traditionally focused on transportation issues, but that's a really important one, especially in a state like Alabama and a metro where we don't have emissions testing. So those national standards become really important for a place like this. And so because of this administration, we're being torn in a dozen different directions at any one time. But then even more particular to North Birmingham is if you look at who is in charge of EPA Region 4, it's Trey Glenn. Trey Glenn used to be the director of the Alabama Department of Environmental Management. He left in a cloud of corruption and scandal there. And he is now in charge of EPA Region 4, which is the Southeast, and he was a client of Drummond Company and Balch and Bingham and Strata Consulting and all of these groups that have been involved in the corruption and the undermining of our democracy here. So, I mean, it's coming from all sides.
Right. I guess in addition to that, I would just say that, there's not necessarily a lot of faith or confidence that the EPA is going to be aggressive, in terms of bringing up this issue of whether or not the 35th Avenue site should be expanded or, added to the national priorities list. Again, hopefully that it would happen. And I believe that those people in the leadership position within the EPA still have that duty, to be a watchdog over these agencies. So we should apply pressure on them. But, as Michael mentioned, it is going to be much more of an uphill battle for sure.
I want to remind you that you're listening to Knowledge is Power. We're going to head out to another break, and we'll see you on the other side.
Looking for a new way to generate substantial revenue for your business? Street Signs is the lowest cost